The Snare Is Broken, a Havoc in Wyoming short story by Millie Copper.
Chapter 1. The crash of breaking glass cut through the humid Florida air as Jerry Stiles pressed his back against the marble pillar in the resort lobby, his 4-year-old son Carson clinging to his leg. 20 feet away, a middle-aged man in a Hawaiian shirt swung a decorative oar at the empty buffet, screaming about his rights as a paying customer. "Where's the food?" a woman shrieked from near the concierge desk. "We paid $5,000 for this week." Jerry's wife, Sandy, grabbed his 16-year-old daughter Jasmine's arm, trying to pull her toward the elevator bank, but Jasmine jerked away. "Dad, this is insane," Jasmine hissed. "These people have lost it over missing lunch. It's not like we're going to starve." Jerry wished she were right. Last week, as the terrorists crashed the planes and exploded the bridges, resort management assured everyone that their food deliveries were simply late. 3 days ago, when the power grid failed and their cell phones stopped working, they'd promised the backup generators would keep essential services operating. Yesterday, when the resort's food supplies were exhausted, they vanished. Now, the guests were turning on each other. A bottle shattered against the wall near Jerry's head, spraying him with glass. Carson whimpered and buried his face against Jerry's leg. "We need to get out of here," Sandy said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. She worked as a nurse back home in Wyoming, and Jerry could see her mentally cataloging the potential injuries from the chaos erupting around them. The mob numbered around 30 people, primarily men, although Jerry noticed a few women among them. After breaking into the bar, they systematically destroyed everything within reach. Someone got into the kitchen and was throwing pots and pans, the metallic planing echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "This way," Jerry said, spotting a service corridor behind the front desk. They slipped around the edge of the lobby, Carson in Jerry's arms now, moving from pillar to pillar. An overturned couch blocked the elevator bank, not that it worked anyway. The power outage stopped them from functioning. They'd been taking the stairs for days, up and down all 8 flights. Behind them, someone screamed. Jerry glanced back to see 2 men fighting over a bottle of water, rolling across the marble floor while others cheered them on. "Let's go," Sandy urged. Coming down here in search of food was a mistake. "But, Mom," Carson whined. "I'm hungry." "We'll find something, buddy," Jerry promised, though he wasn't exactly sure what. A few items remained in the room, insufficient for more than a couple of days, even with rationing. The hope management might return and bring the food they'd promised yesterday was what brought them to the lobby. Another scream came from the lobby, this one full of pain and agony. Sandy looked back. Jerry reached for her hand. "We gotta go, babe." They ran for the stairs. The 8th floor was mysteriously quiet compared to the mayhem below. Their suite, an expensive indulgence that now felt like a fortress, overlooked the Gulf. Even with everything happening, the view was still breathtaking. But mostly it reminded Jerry how isolated they were. No boats on the horizon, no planes in the sky. The traffic on the once busy road next to the resort was now rare. Saturday's cyber attacks resulted in most gas stations being unable to pump gas or process credit card payments. The following day, there were explosions on the Texas side of the Gulf, targeting the refineries. Everything was different within a few days. "I can't believe those people," Jasmine said, flopping onto the couch. "Acting like animals over some missing food. Don't they realize this is temporary? The government will fix the power, trucks will start running again, planes will fly. We'll go home. Things will go back to normal." Jerry and Sandy exchanged a look. At 16, Jasmine still believed in the resilience of the systems protecting her. Jerry was losing that faith with each passing hour. "Honey," Sandy said gently, "I don't think this is temporary anymore." "What do you mean?" "The attacks weren't random," Jerry said. "First, they targeted the planes, then the bridges, and finally the power grid. So, the military will stop them. The police will restore order." "With what?" Jerry asked. "Basic communication is down. The military can't move equipment without fuel. The hospitals can't treat patients without power. Everything's connected, Jasmine. When you take down the grid, you take down everything else." "And," Sandy sighed, "after what happened yesterday, I'm not even sure anyone knows what is happening." Jerry closed his eyes. That was something he hated thinking about. The government's leadership was eliminated, and they didn't even know who might be running the country. They believed the president was still alive, as his announcement of the assassination of many senators and congresspeople proved true. The identity of the deceased remained unannounced, but the number appeared substantial, and the event highly coordinated. similar to all other actions taken by the terrorist. Sandy adjusted herself on the couch. Carson was asleep in her arms, exhausted by the stress and heat. The resort's backup generators had failed 2 days ago, and the Florida humidity was becoming unbearable. Jerry opened the sliding door to the balcony, but there was no breeze today. "We need to talk about leaving," Sandy said quietly. "And go where?" Jasmine demanded. "We're stuck in Florida. We don't have a car, remember? You guys decided flying was so much more convenient." Jerry winced. She was right. They flew down from Prospect, opting to avoid renting a car and use ride-shares instead. However, at the start of the crisis, with planes grounded, they attempted to rent a car for their return trip, an impossible feat. Everyone was trying to leave at the same time. They even tried to purchase a vehicle, but it proved unsuccessful. "Let's attempt another car purchase," Sandy suggested. "With what money?" Jerry pulled out his wallet. 3 20s and a handful of smaller bills. "I've got about $80 left. I spent most of our cash on food from other guests when the restaurant closed. Before we planned to use the credit card to buy a car, remember?" "Maybe." She met his gaze and lowered her voice. "We steal a car." Jasmine's eyes widened. "Wow. That's not something I ever expected to hear from you." "These are desperate times," Sandy said. "Besides, your dad would know how to do it, right, Jerry?" Jerry moved to the window. He didn't want to admit he'd been thinking the same thing. He'd brought what he thought was more than enough cash. They'd planned to use their credit cards for most things. One of those types where each dollar spent earned airline miles. It was a way to work toward next year's vacation. They'd already decided on Disneyland. Carson would be the perfect age to really love it, and most likely, it would be the last family vacation Jasmine went on with them. She didn't want to go this year. She'd practically begged to stay home, but 16 wasn't old enough to stay alone for a week. Their renter, who lived in the small house next door, offered to keep an eye on her. But Sandy insisted it was a family vacation. "Besides," she'd said, "my aunt is looking forward to meeting you." Jasmine rolled her eyes like a 16-year-old who believes they are all-knowing. However, she did not continue to argue. A stop-off at Sandy's aunt's home was one of the reasons they chose St. Pete Beach. She lived on the other side of Tampa, close to the airport. They'd spent their first night with her after landing, and she'd even driven them to the resort when it was time to check in. They'd planned to meet again for dinner on Friday, but the state of the world changed all that. She'd offered to let them stay with her until things settled down. They would have taken her up on it, but the cyber attack hit, and everything unraveled. Now they were stuck with little money, barely any food, and other guests who were becoming more unstable by the day. He could steal a car. As a mechanic, he knew the basics of how to do it, but it would need to be the correct car. Old enough that he could do what was needed without the computer chips that made newer cars impossible to steal. Something from the 1990s or earlier would work best. The issue was locating a working vehicle with remaining fuel. Following that, a larger problem was possible. The owner of the car might shoot him for trying to take it. "We're not at that point yet," he said. "Not to the point of stealing." "Really, Jerry? If you have a better idea, I'm all ears." "We can't stay here." Sandy gestured around the hotel room. "The ATMs don't work. Banks are closed. Grocery stores. Restaurants. The cash in your pocket and the food in this room are all we have." He turned from the window. "Gas stations are also closed." "So, we steal the gas we need too." Jasmine stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I'm going downstairs to see if anyone knows what's really happening. Maybe some of the guests have radios or—" "No." Sandy's voice was firm. "You saw what it's like down there. It's not safe. You're being paranoid. Those people are scared and hungry. If we show them we're not a threat, they'll calm down." "Jasmine, listen to me," Jerry said. "Fear and hunger make people dangerous. These aren't our neighbors from Wyoming, who we've known for years. These are strangers, and desperate strangers do desperate things. You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Jerry's voice carried a weight that made both Jasmine and Sandy look at him. "I've seen things like this before. Well, on television at least. Sometimes disasters don't bring out the best in people. We might want to think they will, but that's not always the case. And that's when there's a promise of help to come. Here, nobody's coming to help us." Jasmine's defiance wavered, but only for a moment. "Well, I'm not going to sit in this room and wait to die. There has to be something we can do." "There is," Jerry said. "We stay quiet, we stay together, and we figure out our next move. But we do it as a family." "Fine," Jasmine said, but Jerry could hear the resentment in her voice. She always resisted authority, and the stress was making it worse. Her biological mother behaved similarly, strong-willed and independent. Sometimes it was a strength. Sometimes it was dangerous. Chapter 2. As the sun set over the Gulf, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Jerry tried to inventory their resources. He had an LED flashlight, something he traveled with routinely, after a power outage on a trip left Jasmine crying. His remaining cash, Sandy's basic first aid supplies, some hotel toiletries, Carson's few toys, and their vacation clothes. After light meals for the day, they still had a few food items. The room had a kitchenette, and Sandy's aunt had taken them to the grocery store on the way here. But it wasn't much. He looked out the window. There had been people fishing for fun before the attacks. He lacked a pole or tackle, but perhaps he would locate the needed items and fish tomorrow. That would help. From somewhere in the resort, he heard shouting and what sounded like breaking furniture. The insanity was spreading. "We should get some sleep," Sandy said. "Tomorrow, we need to figure out how to get out of here." Jerry hadn't been sleeping much since the electricity stopped. The two-bedroom suite was spacious, with Jasmine in her own room. Originally, they'd had Carson on the couch in the living space, but Saturday night Jerry swapped with him. He was now in the primary bedroom with Sandy, while Jerry slept on the couch. Housekeeping services, like pretty much everything else, were a thing in the past. Not that it was difficult keeping the suite in order. They were there with only their suitcases. Somehow, though, Jasmine managed to have her room looking like a disaster with clothes everywhere each morning. She'd grudgingly clean it up at his insistence. He had no idea how a carry-on and a personal bag held so much. He'd moved to the living room in order to act as a sentry. Before they were married, Sandy had worked as a traveling nurse. During those years, she lived in various accommodations and took her safety and security seriously. Their family travels often included some of the things she'd done when alone, including traveling with a rubber door wedge. Sandy swore by them, insisting that, for the limited space they took up, they gave her peace of mind. Besides, she'd said, it makes more sense than some of those social media videos showing towels and hangers securing the door. Bringing the wedge was something they did on each vacation, and while Jerry wasn't sure of the necessity, he'd said nothing when she put it into place each night. Now they used it not only at night, but any time they were in the room. With the wedge in place, he had a sense of security that might not be there if they hadn't brought it. He'd also found a few items around the suite and in the hotel that he'd turned into weapons. The kitchenette held a few knives. None of them were great, but he'd improved them by sharpening on a cement curb. He'd also found a rock in one of the landscaped beds and brought it back to the room to use as a whetstone. It was nothing like what he had at home, and he was kicking himself for not bringing a checked bag with a decent knife or two and a proper stone. But after a bad checked luggage experience, they'd made a point of traveling carry-on only. For the better of the knives, he'd made a couple of sheaths out of cardboard they'd found. Sandy and he each carried a knife on their hip. They set aside a couple of empty wine bottles for hand-to-hand combat. They'd raided a housekeeper's cart and found a spray bottle with some kind of cleaning supply. Jerry figured he could spray it in someone's eyes. Sandy kept the bottle of hairspray she'd found somewhere next to her bed for the same purpose. Also on the housekeeper's cart was a mid-sized broom. He'd removed the broom head and whittled the wooden handle to a point with one of the knives, turning it into a makeshift spear. He settled onto the couch, surrounded by his array of self-defense items. At some point, he must have dozed off, because he woke with a start. He lay there for a moment, wondering what might have woken him. Grabbing the flashlight he'd left on the table, he moved to the balcony door. He was unable to see much in the darkness. Clouds covered the moon, but the breeze entering the room felt wonderful. After a few minutes, he moved to the primary bedroom. Carson whimpered softly in his sleep while Sandy breathed steadily beside him. He smiled at the sight of his wife and their child, though the innocence of it made his chest tighten. What should have been a joyful family vacation was turning into something else entirely. A nightmare they were powerless to escape. And they were living it over 2,000 miles from home. He returned to the couch before deciding to look in on Jasmine. The door to her room was slightly ajar. He kept the light low and scanned it over the bed. The bed was empty. Jasmine was gone. Jerry rushed back to the main room, heading for the door. The rubber stopper jammed under it was gone, and the safety bar was open. She'd gone right out the door, with him sleeping on the couch. How'd she manage that? Jerry did not know, but when he found her, he planned to find out, and ground her. Not that there was much to ground her from. Still, there would be consequences. What was she thinking? Just to be sure, he checked the bathroom, the closet, even under the beds, but she was definitely gone. He hesitated briefly, deciding whether he should leave Sandy asleep while he searched for his daughter. No, if she woke up and found him gone, she'd freak. And then he'd be in trouble too. He might leave her a note. Still not a viable solution. "Sandy," he whispered, gently shaking his wife's shoulder. "Wake up." "Hmm?" she mumbled. Seeing his expression, she sat up quickly. "What's wrong?" "Jasmine's gone. Slipped out while I was sleeping." "Gone? Gone where?" No idea. Jerry's jaw was so tight his teeth ached. Went right out the door. Probably trying to prove she can handle herself. But even as he said it, Jerry felt a cold fear settle in his stomach. His headstrong daughter was somewhere in the disorder below, alone and vulnerable, in a world that had suddenly become very dangerous. "We have to find her," Sandy said. "I know." Jerry was already putting on his shoes. "You stay here with Carson. I'll go look for her." "Jerry, what if you don't come back?" He paused as he tied his shoe. It was a fair question. If something happened to him, Sandy's situation would be dire. Trapped at the resort with their 4-year-old, lacking resources and help. But Jasmine was his daughter, and she was out there alone. "I'll come back," he said. "Lock the door behind me and put the rubber stopper back in place. Keep the spear handy," he motioned to the homemade weapon. "Don't open the door for anyone except me or Jasmine." He stepped into the hallway, hearing the deadbolt click behind him. The corridor was pitch black, except for the weak beam of his flashlight. Somewhere in the distance, he heard voices, angry voices, getting closer. Jerry started toward the stairs, hoping he wasn't already too late. Chapter 3. The stairwell reeked of urine and vomit. Jerry covered his nose with his shirt and descended slowly, testing each step in the fading beam of his flashlight. On the 6th floor, voices echoed down to him from above. Male voices, rough and aggressive. "Told you she went this way." "Check every room. Little princess thinks she can hide from us." Jerry froze. They were talking about a female, someone who was hiding. It could be Jasmine. He clicked off his flashlight and pressed himself against the stairwell wall, listening as the voices grew louder. "She's got to be on one of these floors," a man said. "Kid like that? Probably hiding in Daddy's room. When we find her, she's gonna learn some manners," another voice added, followed by crude laughter. Jerry's blood ran cold. These weren't resort guests looking for help. These were predators, and they were hunting. He waited until the voices moved past his floor and continued down toward the lobby. If Jasmine had gone downstairs to understand the situation, that's where he'd find her. The main floor was a war zone, even worse than when they'd been down earlier in the day. The elegant lobby that had welcomed them a week ago was now littered with broken furniture, shattered glass, and the fragments of civilization breaking down. Someone had spray-painted "Property of the New Florida Republic" across the marble wall behind the front desk. "Huff," he murmured. "That's new." He stayed against the wall as his eyes searched the space, looking for his daughter. The room was empty. No sign of his daughter. No sign of anyone. "You looking for someone?" Jerry spun around to find a thin man in a sweat-stained polo shirt watching him. It occurred to Jerry that he might have seen him earlier in the week. Another vacationer. "My daughter," Jerry said carefully. 16, brown hair, about 5'6". "Have you seen her?" The man studied Jerry for a moment. "You got anything to trade?" "Trade for what?" "Information. Everything's got a price now, friend. Food, water, information, protection." The man gestured around the destroyed lobby. "Welcome to the new economy." Jerry pulled out one of his $20 bills. "This is all I can spare." The man laughed bitterly. "Paper money? That stuff's worthless now. You got any food, batteries, medicine?" Jerry considered the small first aid kit back up in the room. Sandy had stocked it well with bandages and travel-size medicines. But somehow, Jerry didn't believe this man was searching for antacid. Besides, he wasn't about to trade their medical supplies for information that might not even be accurate. "Never mind," Jerry said, turning away. "Wait." The man grabbed his arm. "Hey, bud, I got kids too, okay? Not here, back home with the babysitter. At least they should be safe. But hey, I understand. Your girl, the pretty one with the attitude, she was here about an hour ago." Jerry's heart jumped. Where is she now? She and a few others took off with some local boys. They told them they'd take them somewhere safe, somewhere with food and power. The man shook his head. Stupid kids trusted them. Left the hotel? The men in the stairwell weren't after Jasmine. They were after someone else. Somehow, that didn't bring him much comfort. What boys? Where did they take her? I don't know their names, but they weren't guests. Local punks who've been hanging around since yesterday, looking for opportunities. He gestured toward the graffiti. They did that. Say they have some kind of operation in town, promising protection to anyone who'll join them and their new Florida Republic. Jerry felt sick. Protection from what? From the other gangs. From the people who want to take what you have. From reality. The man's voice was bitter. Look around, friend. This is what civilization looks like when the lights go out. Your daughter's probably safer with them than she would be here. As if to prove his point, a commotion erupted from another section of the building. Jerry leaned away from the wall to find where the noise was coming from. Two men were fighting over a backpack, rolling across the floor while others cheered them on. The smaller man was losing badly, blood streaming from his nose. We need to stop them, Jerry said. Stop them yourself, the man replied. I'm not getting involved. That's how you end up dead. A few more people appeared, but none stepped in to help. Jerry wrestled with the conflict between doing what he thought was right and doing what he thought was safe. The image of Jasmine somewhere, and Sandy upstairs keeping watch over Carson while fretting for them both, held him steady. Jerry watched the beating continue until the smaller man stopped moving. The winner rifled through the backpack, pulling out a few energy bars and a bottle of water. The crowd dispersed, leaving the unconscious man bleeding on the marble floor. Nobody helped him. Welcome to paradise, the man said. Your daughter's smart to get out while she could. Jerry made his way to where the man lay on the ground, now that the larger man was gone. A few people were there to help. Is he dead? A woman asked, lighting a cigarette. Don't look like it. An older man said. He's breathing. Roughed him up pretty good. Gonna have a shiner for sure. And a headache. The other man looking over the injured guy said. The injured guy moaned, and the two helped him up. Where's your room, buddy? The older one asked. As they walked away, Jerry called out, Hey, any of you see a girl? 16? Brown hair? Pretty. I understand she was down here about an hour ago, and he didn't want to finish the sentence. Didn't want to say she'd left with some boys. What would they think of his daughter if he admitted that? Nope. Sorry. The older man said while the younger one shook his head. The injured man moaned, but Jerry didn't believe it was in response to his question. The lady who had asked if the man was dead said, There was a girl down here earlier. You saw her? Jerry prayed the woman would give him better news than the other man had. She shrugged before taking a drag of her cigarette. She and a few other vacationers took off with those boys. The ones who were here earlier today. Earlier? He shook his head. Pretty sure she was chatting them up. Before that mess happened at lunch, they were on the beach. Jerry pinched the bridge of his nose. Jasmine had been on the beach. They'd all gone out this morning to walk along the shoreline hoping to find something useful. She'd asked if she could sit with some teams. Jerry thought they were also hotel guests. Was he wrong about that? They started showing up yesterday, a woman told him. Young men, mostly. Some girls. They said they were here to help, but they were probably scouting. Scouting for what? To see what we had worth taking. She shrugged. That's what I figure anyway. They were sizing us up. And these are the same people who were with my daughter tonight? He tried to remember what the kids had looked like this morning. Average. There wasn't anything that stood out about them, which is why he concluded they were harmless kids. Hotel guests. They were talking. Telling her she didn't have to listen to anyone who wasn't looking out for her best interests. Said they had a place where young people could be safe and make their own decisions. 4 or 5 of them took off with him. Jerry's stomach sank. It was a common trick to pull someone in. Find a person who's angry or powerless, then offer them a place and a purpose. Jasmine had been upset with him and Sandy. She wanted to feel useful. That made her an easy target. Which way did they go? Down the beach. The woman said, gesturing loosely in the direction of the Gulf. But mister, you don't want to go out there alone, especially not at night. Why not? It's not a single group anymore, she said. There's at least 3 different gangs operating in the area. They're fighting each other for territory and resources. A man alone on the street is asking to be robbed or killed. How do you know? People talk. Things are getting bad out there. Jerry thanked her and continued his search, but he already knew what he was going to do. Jasmine was his daughter, and he would not abandon her to whatever fate awaited her with the local gangs. Chapter 4. The resort's exterior was unnaturally quiet compared to the lawlessness inside. Palm fronds rustled in the warm breeze, and the waves crashed gently against the shore. For a moment, it seemed almost normal, like any other vacation evening. A scream from an upper floor behind him broke the illusion. Jerry oriented himself toward the beach, remembering the woman's words about the gangs heading that direction. The resort's landscaped grounds stretched before him, dotted with decorative palms and tropical plants that now looked menacing in the darkness. Security lights that should have illuminated the pathways were dark, leaving deep shadows between the buildings. He moved carefully, staying off the main walkways and using the vegetation for cover. His Wyoming upbringing had taught him to move quietly through terrain when hunting deer and elk. He figured it was little different from avoiding human dangers. The knife bumped against his hip with each step, a constant reminder of how defenseless he really was. What he wouldn't give for a hunting rifle or a pistol. 100 yards from the main building, Jerry heard voices ahead. He dropped low behind a cluster of ornamental bushes, his heart hammering. 3 figures emerged from the shadows near the pool area, moving with the casual confidence of people who owned the territory. "Told you we should have taken more from that room," one of them was saying. "Old lady had to have more stashed somewhere." "We got what we needed," another replied. Something long shifted in his hands, a rifle or shotgun maybe. "Besides, we're supposed to be focused on recruitment, not robbing the guests. Yet. When do we get to have some real fun?" The third voice was younger, probably around Jasmine's age. "I'm tired of playing nice with these rich tourists." "Soon enough. Once we get enough numbers, we can do whatever we want. Nobody's coming to help them." Jerry's blood chilled. These weren't desperate survivors. They were opportunists, feeding off the collapse. And somewhere out there, they, or scum like them, had his daughter. The worst part, from everything he'd heard, Jasmine had gone with them willingly. The group moved past his hiding spot, heading back toward the resort. Jerry waited until their voices faded, before continuing toward the beach. The kitchen knife seemed pathetically inadequate against armed men, but he had to find Jasmine and get her away from them before these animals decided to stop playing nice. The beach access was through a wooden walkway that crossed over the dunes. Jerry paused at the edge, scanning the moonlit sand below. The beach stretched in both directions, empty except for scattered debris that had washed ashore. No sign of his daughter or her captors. He was about to descend when he heard footsteps on the wooden planks behind him. Heavy boots moving fast. Jerry spun around to discover a massive silhouette blocking his path back to the resort. "Well, well, what do we have here?" The man, built like a linebacker, wore military-style cargo pants and a tank top, displaying arms covered in tattoos. In his right hand, he carried a baseball bat with something wrapped around the end. Barbed wire, Jerry realized with sick dread. Barbed wire looped around the bat, starting about an inch below the head and covering 3 inches. "I'm looking for my daughter," Jerry said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Your daughter?" The man stepped closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. Jerry took a step back. "Possibly? You've seen her?" The man leaned the tip of the bat on the ground, putting his weight on it like it was a cane. "I've seen a lot of girls." "She cute?" "She's a brunette." "Brunette? That mean she has brown hair?" Yeah, right. Brown hair. About this tall." He moved his hand to his chin. The man scratched the scruff on his chin. Sounds familiar. She have an attitude?" Jerry sighed. Could the guy have seen her? Talked to her even? Or was he messing with him? "Well, she's 16. The man lifted his chin and laughed. "Yep, she's got attitude." He straightened immediately, the bat once again in his hand. "I think I know exactly who she is. She and her little friends. Said they wanted to party, then decided they were too good for us once we explained how things work now." Rage flared in Jerry's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Anger would get him killed, and Jasmine might be truly lost. "Where is she?" The man laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Somewhere safe, learning valuable life skills. But don't worry, Daddy. You won't be around to see what she becomes." He swung the bat in a vicious arc toward Jerry's head. Jerry threw himself sideways, the weapon whistling past his ear and splintering the wooden railing. The man's momentum carried him forward, and Jerry took his chance. He drew the knife from its cardboard sheath and drove it toward the man's exposed ribs. The blade bit deep, and the man roared in pain and fury. But instead of dropping, he backhanded Jerry across the face with his free hand, sending him stumbling backward. Blood seeped through the man's tank top, but the wound wasn't enough to stop him. He raised the bat again, and Jerry knew he was about to die. Desperation gave him clarity. As the bat descended, Jerry grabbed a handful of sand from the walkway and flung it into his attacker's eyes. The man cursed and stumbled, momentarily blinded. Jerry lunged forward this time, aiming for the throat. The knife found its target. Hot blood sprayed across Jerry's hands as the man dropped the bat and clutched his neck, making horrible gurgling sounds. He dropped to his knees before pitching forward onto the wooden planks. Jerry stood over the body, shaking. He'd never killed anyone before, never even been in an actual fight. But as he looked down at the man who'd threatened his daughter, he had no remorse, only cold satisfaction that the animal posed no threat to Jasmine. He wiped the blood off the knife with the dead man's shirt and sheathed it again. The body was too heavy to move, and he didn't have time to hide it properly. Eventually, people would find him, but he hoped to have Jasmine back before that. Jerry picked up the baseball bat, testing its weight. It was better than a knife for close combat, and the barbed wire would make it devastating against unarmored opponents. The sand was soft underfoot, muffling his steps as he moved along the water's edge. To his right, the dark gulf stretched to the horizon. To his left, beachfront condos and hotels rose like silent monuments to a world that no longer existed. Most were dark, but he saw the occasional flicker of candlelight or the glow of a battery-powered device. A quarter-mile down the beach, Jerry spotted lights ahead. Multiple sources concentrated in one area. As he got closer, he made out people clustered around a large bonfire. Voices carried on the night air, along with the sound of music from a battery-powered radio. Was this, then, the people who had his daughter? Jerry dropped to his belly and crawled forward through the dunes, using beach grass for concealment. The group was larger than he'd expected. No fewer than a dozen people. Most seemed to be young men in their teens and 20s, but he saw women too, and even some children who appeared to be younger than Jasmine. They weren't all here voluntarily. Jerry observed zip-tie restraints on some of the people near the fire, and armed guards positioned around the perimeter. This wasn't merely a gang. It was a slave camp. He scanned the faces illuminated by the firelight, looking for his daughter. There, positioned near a smaller fire at the edge of the camp, her hands bound behind her back. Even in the flickering light, Jerry noticed the defiance in Jasmine's posture, the way she held her chin up despite her circumstances. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by cold calculation. She was alive, but getting her out would be nearly impossible. The camp was too well guarded, and he was only one man with a knife and a bat against dozens of armed predators. But he'd come this far. He'd killed to get here, and he wasn't leaving without his daughter. Jerry studied the camp layout, memorizing the positions of guards and escape routes. The beach offered the best avenue for a quick getaway, but they'd have to cross open ground to reach it. He needed a distraction, something big enough to draw attention away from Jasmine. That's when he noticed the fuel containers stacked near the main bonfire. Gas cans probably siphoned from abandoned vehicles, enough to create a very large distraction indeed. Jerry checked his watch. Nearly 2 a.m. While there were people mingling around, many were now heading toward what looked like a rundown hotel. Settling in for the night, one man with a woman on each arm seemed to give orders, telling a handful of men to keep watch. Jerry would have his opportunity soon. He would get his daughter back once the others settled. He crept through the dunes toward the edge of the camp, the knife solid in his grip, the barbed wire bat ready. Whatever it took to get Jasmine back, he'd do it. Behind him, waves crashed against the shore with endless patience, indifferent to the human drama playing out on the sand. Above, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to another small act of desperation in a world gone mad. Jerry thought of Sandy and Carson, waiting for him back at the resort. He considered the lengthy journey home to Wyoming, if they managed to travel that far. But mostly, he thought of his daughter, sitting bound and frightened in the firelight ahead. He'd found her. Now, he had to save her. Chapter 5. Jerry waited in the dunes for what felt like hours, watching the camp settle into its nighttime routine. The man he'd seen giving orders had disappeared into the hotel with his companions. Most everyone else followed, leaving only 4 guards visible around the perimeter. 2 near the main bonfire, 1 patrolling the beach, and another stationed near where the captives were being held. The fuel containers lay about 50 feet from the bonfire. Jerry counted at least 8 gas cans, in various sizes from small single gallons to large 5 gallons. More than enough for his distraction, and plenty left over for the family's escape. He simply had to get close enough without being seen. The guard nearest Jasmine was leaning against a palm tree, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. He looked young, approximately 19 or 20, and Jerry could see him fighting to stay awake. Perfect. Jerry started his advance, belly crawling through the sand and using all available concealment. A discarded beach chair here, a pile of driftwood there. The bat and knife pressed against his body as he moved. He fought the urge to rush. Patience would keep them both alive. At least that was his hope. Not hope, prayer. He rarely went to church, but now he prayed he was doing what was necessary to save his daughter. He took a deep breath. "Okay, God, now's a good time to give me a hand," he whispered. He'd never been in this type of situation before. He'd never served in the military or in any sort of law enforcement capacity. Although he'd volunteered for search and rescue years prior, they hadn't taught him how to sneak up on people. Most of his training focused on keeping himself and others alive, not on how to free prisoners and kill bad guys. 20 feet from the fuel containers, he paused. The 2 guards by the bonfire were deep in conversation, positioned so they were facing the Gulf, occasionally glancing around, but paying little attention to their surroundings. Amateurs. Jerry had seen better discipline from weekend hunting groups back home. He crept forward, reaching the first gas can. The cap was loose. These people were as careless with fire safety as they were with security. Jerry carefully lifted the container, testing its weight. Nearly full. He set it aside and grabbed a second smaller one, this one only half full. Perfect for distraction. As he lifted the can, though, he realized with one guy patrolling the beach, 2 chit-chatting like women, and the 4th practically asleep, a distraction might be overkill. Perhaps he might simply kill the guy nearest the prisoners and free them, help them sneak away before the others even knew what happened. The guard by the captives had finally succumbed to exhaustion, his chin dropping to his chest. Jerry heard his steady breathing from 10 feet away. Moving like a ghost, Jerry slipped behind the palm tree and drew his knife. He'd never killed a sleeping man before. What was he saying? Until tonight, he'd never killed a human. For a moment, his conscience rebelled. This kid was barely older than Jasmine. But Jerry looked at his zip-tied daughter, and his resolve hardened. Some choices were simple when your loved one's life hung in the balance. Was he capable of doing it silently? He had to. He needed to make sure none of the others heard or saw him. He thought about the man he'd killed on the beach. The knife to the ribs hadn't stopped him. Had he done something wrong? Jerry did his own butchering. He knew where the heart sat in a deer, how the ribs flared around it. Maybe it was the same in a man. He'd gone too low before. This time he'd go higher, up under the armpit. The sleeping guy's seated position made it possible. He needed to get closer. The bonfire would be between them and the 2 men talking. If he could make a silent kill, they might not even realize he was there. Realize their buddy was dead. If he made a sound, he'd never see Sandy or Carson again. His daughter would watch him die. Jerry clamped his hand over the guard's mouth and drove the knife between his ribs toward his heart. The young man's eyes snapped open with confusion and terror, but only for a moment, until his body became limp, his eyes wide but vacant. Jerry lowered him silently to the sand. "Jasmine," he whispered, moving to where his daughter sat bound near the smaller fire. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad? How did you?" "Shh." Jerry was already cutting through the zip ties with his knife. "We're getting out of here, all of you." There were 6 other captives. Another girl of Jasmine's age, 2 women who looked to be in their 20s, 2 teenage boys, and an older man with gray hair. Jerry moved quickly, freeing the old man first and passing the knife to him, gesturing for him to free the others. "Listen carefully," he whispered to the group while the man worked, his eyes on the remaining guards. The 2 were still talking, staring off toward the water while the other was still out of sight. "Get down and crawl past the gas cans. The second you're clear, run." "What about you?" Jasmine asked. "I'll be right behind you. But if I don't make it, you keep moving. Get to Sandy and your brother, and head for Sandy's aunt's place. I'll meet you there." The older man grabbed Jerry's arm. "Stay with your daughter. Let me help." Jerry studied his face and saw something there, determination and resolve. "Can you handle a rifle?" "Yep." Jerry pointed to the dead guard's weapon. "Take his rifle and cover our escape. But remember, we need to move fast once this starts. Understood. The man gave a nod. Jerry motioned for the group to crawl toward the beach, staying low behind the dunes. They'd made it halfway when a shout erupted from behind them. "Hey, where's Marcus?" The beach patrol guard had returned and found his dead companion. "Run," Jerry whispered urgently, as chaos erupted in the camp. The two guards by the fire were scrambling for their weapons. He grabbed one of the 2-gallon gas cans as the group ran for the beach, Jasmine right beside him. Behind them, the hotel erupted in bedlam as gang members poured out of the building, shouting and firing wildly into the darkness. A few shots came close, kicking up sand near Jerry's feet, but the shooters were firing blind. The older man, Jerry still didn't know his name, had picked up the dead guard's rifle and was laying down covering fire. His shots were precise, deliberate, and Jerry saw at least 2 gang members drop. "Keep moving," the man shouted. "I'll hold them as long as I can." They reached the water's edge and turned back toward the resort, splashing through the shallow waves. The wet sand was easier to run on, and Jerry's Wyoming-trained lungs worked efficiently despite the humid air. A quarter mile up the beach, Jerry called a halt. The group collapsed on the sand, gasping for breath. Jerry did a quick head count. Everyone had made it, except the older man. "We can't leave him," one of the women said. He knew what he was doing. Jerry replied, though it pained him to say it. He bought us time to escape. As if summoned by his words, a figure emerged from the darkness. Limping but alive, the older man held on to the rifle. "Let's keep moving, people," he said as he approached. Jerry stared at him in amazement. "How did you?" "The Army teaches you a few things about tactical retreats." The man grinned, despite the blood running down his leg. "Now, I suggest we keep moving. Those animals will regroup soon enough, and they're going to be angry." The group continued along the beach, putting distance between themselves and the burning camp. Jerry carried the precious gas can, already thinking about how to get his family out of the resort and to Sandy's aunt's place. They had at least a little fuel, but they still needed a vehicle. "Dad," Jasmine said quietly as they walked, "I'm sorry. I was so stupid to leave like I did. We wanted to have some fun." She motioned to a girl and boy of about her age from the group he'd freed. "I was tired of being cooped up. We all were. We'll discuss it later. Let's get out of here. Get someplace safe." "Okay, but next time I'll listen to you and Sandy." Jerry put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Let's focus on getting out of here." As they approached the resort, Jerry could see lights flickering in some of the upper floors. They had fuel now. Not a lot, but probably enough to get to Sandy's aunt's place. Get there, and then make a plan. A plan to get home to Wyoming. The younger captives peeled off, saying they needed to find their families. All of them were at the resort next door to the place the Styles were staying. The old man fell into step beside them, still limping but keeping pace. "So, what's the plan now?" Jerry searched the upper floors trying to find his family's room. He wasn't sure, but believed he saw movement on one of the balconies. Was it Sandy? "Now we get my wife and son. Get out of here before those goons come looking and figure out how to get home. Mind if I tag along? I've got nowhere else to go, and it sounds like you could use someone who knows which end of a rifle to hold." Jerry considered the offer. An experienced soldier would be invaluable for the journey ahead. "Why would you want to help us?" "Why not? This place is falling apart fast. I bought myself a condo down the beach a few months ago. Can't say there's much for me here now." "How'd those people get you?" "I was out fishing. Thought it'd be a good way to add some protein to my coffers." "You have a car?" "Yup. You?" "Nope. We were on vacation. Why would you help us?" "As I said, any place has got to be better than this." He gestured back toward the gang. "Besides, I figure I owe you one for getting me out of there. You don't owe me anything. You're the one who saved us. Let's call it even and focus on survival." Jerry nodded. In this new world, allies were precious commodities. And since the man had saved their lives, he should be able to trust him, right? Chapter 6. The old car's engine coughed once before settling into a steady rhythm as they pulled away from the garage. Jerry drove while the old man rode shotgun. In the back seat, Sandy held Carson close, and Jasmine pressed her face to the window staring toward the Gulf. Her fingers laced around Sandy's. Somehow, Sandy knew they were on borrowed time when Jerry and Jasmine returned. She packed their bags with essentials, and both she and Carson were ready to go within minutes of their arrival. The man who called himself Walt Logan waited in the hallway, watching their backs, as he put it. Gas tank's about 3/4 full, thanks to what you added, Walt said, leading slightly toward Jerry. After picking up Sandy and Carson, they quickly left the resort and headed to the man's condo. He wasn't sure the gangsters knew where he lived, but they needed to move fast. Sandy took a few minutes to clean and bandage Walt's wound. Once that was done, Walt packed essentials, including days' worth of food, several handguns, and rifles. He had a rifle positioned so he could grab it while they drove. He gave Jerry and Sandy each a pistol from his gun case, which they gratefully accepted. The highway stretched ahead of them, unusually quiet for what should have been morning rush hour. Jerry kept the speedometer steady, not wanting to attract attention or waste fuel. Every few miles, they passed abandoned vehicles on the roadside. See that smoke up ahead? Walt pointed to a dark column rising in the distance. Probably someone careless with their candles. Fire's going to be a danger in this new world. Jerry nodded, adjusting their route to avoid whatever trouble lay ahead. The back roads Walt suggested were longer but safer, winding through suburban neighborhoods and small communities that seemed untouched by the violence consuming the cities. "Thank you," Sandy said quietly from the back seat, "for helping us." The man shrugged. "Had to get out of there anyway." Carson stirred in Sandy's arms, blinking sleepily at the passing landscape. "Are we going home now, Daddy?" "Soon, buddy," Jerry replied, looking in the rearview mirror. "We're going to go to Aunt Lois for now." "Will she and Mr. Walt go to Wyoming with us?" Jerry exchanged a glance with Walt. They hadn't discussed the long-term plan yet, but Wyoming was a long way from Florida, and the roads between here and there were becoming more dangerous every day. "We'll see," Jerry said. Jasmine shifted beside Sandy, leaning her head on her shoulder. "I'm sorry I left." "I know." Sandy dropped a kiss on her hair. "We all make mistakes when we're scared. What matters is that you're safe now." "Those other kids from the resort, do you think they made it back to their families?" "I hope so," Sandy said softly. "We have to believe people are looking out for each other." Walt adjusted his position, favoring his wounded leg. "Your wife's got a good touch with field medicine," he said to Jerry. "Patch job she did will hold until we can get proper supplies." "I've learned a thing or two as a nurse," Sandy replied. "Even how to make do with what you have. Good skill to have these days." They drove through a quiet neighborhood where a few people moved about their morning routines. They hung laundry, tended gardens, life continuing despite the collapse of the larger world. Jerry envied them their apparent normalcy, even as he wondered how long it would last. "Radio's been nothing but static since yesterday," Walt said, adjusting the dial. "Most of the stations probably down, ran out of fuel for their Jennies." "Maybe that's for the best," Jerry replied. "News probably isn't good anyway." "Dad?" Carson's small voice piped up from the back seat. "Are the bad people going to follow us?" Jerry felt his chest tighten. How did you explain to a 4-year-old that the world had changed, that the safety he'd always known was gone? "No, buddy," he said finally. "We're going somewhere safe. Somewhere with lots of space, and people who care about us." Walt gave a nod. "Everyone settle in back there. If all goes well, we'll be there before the sun gets too high." Jerry stared down the road ahead, past the scattered roadblocks and abandoned vehicles, toward whatever awaited them at Lola's place. They had fuel, transportation, and each other. In this new world, that was more than most could count on. "We're going to make it," Sandy said softly. Jerry nodded. "Yeah, we are."
This has been The Snare Is Broken, a Havoc in Wyoming bonus story by Millie Copper, produced by CU Publishing LLC and presented by Killer Cozies. Learn more about Millie Copper's books at milliecopper.com.